By now, I hope you're familiar with the latest tragedy to happen in the Mediterranean. Large ship carrying hundreds and hundreds of migrants desperately trying to reach the shores of Europe that capsized, resulting in literally hundreds of deaths. But somehow, it might even be worse than that. That tragedy, as bad as it is, might be even worse in the fact that it might have been avoidable. And that's coming from interviews that have been conducted with some of the migrants that have been aboard the ship. You can see a shot of it, by the way, here. 750 men, women, and children on the packed boat when it capsized last week, killing hundreds and making the tragedy one of the worst in the Mediterranean Sea. And a reminder, by the way, of how bad the situation has been for a number of years, that that's one of the worst. It should be far and away the absolute worst tragedy in any seas in decades, but unfortunately not. Now, you have the details. Many people might not be familiar with it because, of course, the Titan submersible story did absorb a lot of the nautical-based news oxygen, but only 104 people rescued alive from the capsizing of that ship. And here's the thing. CNN and others have conducted interviews with a number of the migrants that have been aboard the ship, including one from Syria, identified as Rami, who described that when a Greek Coast Guard vessel approached the trawler, they tried to attach a rope to tow it multiple times, and that might have been responsible, at least in part, with what ended up happening. Rami says, the third time they towed us, the boat swayed to the right and everyone was screaming. People began falling into the sea and the boat capsized and no one saw anyone anymore. Brothers were separated, cousins were separated. Another Syrian man, identified as Mustafa, also believes it was the maneuver by the Coast Guard that caused the disaster. Quote, the Greek captain pulled us too fast. It was extremely fast. This caused our boat to sink. Both of the men that were interviewed by CNN there now say that they wish they'd never made the journey, despite the fact that they did thankfully survive, one of the small percentage who did, and are now in Europe able to claim asylum. The Coast Guard of Greece says that this is not the case. They claim no responsibility whatsoever. They deny that they even attempted to tow the vessel at all. Obviously, there are investigations that will be happening, but there are multiple different potential explanations for why this disastrous result happened, assuming that the story that the migrants who are being interviewed are saying is true. So it could be that, as many have said in past cases, what sometimes the Coast Guards will do is they will tow a ship like that or move it in some way, not to make sure that it makes it to the coast safely, but to get it out of their waters, to make sure that it goes to the coast of a different country so that it won't be their issue, which is callous at best and incredibly dangerous and risky at worst. You could go beyond that and wonder if they're doing it in such an obviously risky way, fast maneuvers, pulling the ship way too fast, that shows at least a callous disregard for the lives of hundreds of people aboard it. I am assuming no intent beyond that, but hundreds of people just died, so I understand why some people might think that. In any event, my worry is that this sort of technique will continue, that we'll have tragedies like this again in the future, and that even to the extent that one could investigate this and find out what the truth of it is. After all, they say they did not try to tow this thing. That seems like the sort of thing that would leave behind some sort of evidence. How much willingness will there even be into this? Human rights groups are looking into it. The EU is saying they don't want an independent investigation. Is that really that surprising, considering how the EU and multiple countries, along the coast of the Mediterranean have showed such obvious disregard for the many ships that have capsized in the years leading up to the present? It's an absolute tragedy that sort of has barely merited attention. And I don't just mean like by the media in the US. I hope that people pay attention to these sorts of things, but at the end of the day, that's not what is gonna determine if there's justice or not. But from people there who are going to not only have to respond to this tragedy, but hopefully avert future ones, I would hope that there would be some more attention, some more compassion, but we don't often see it.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.